perfectly natural. She wanted to meet her birth parents. It was supposed to be a joyful reunion, a chance to fill in the missing pieces of her identity. The family was excited. Stephen and Alyssa welcomed Katy with open arms, and she even moved in with them temporarily. But what started as a heartwarming family reunion was about to become something so dark and twisted that it would end in multiple murders across 3 different states. Because you see, there was something about Stephen Plattel that his family didn't fully understand yet. Picture this: a teenage girl finally meeting the parents who gave her life. Katy Plattel's reunion with Stephen and Alyssa seemed like a fairy tale at first. She moved from Connecticut to North Carolina to live with her biological family and get to know her siblings. Stephen, then 40 years old, appeared to be a loving father making up for lost time. He was attentive, caring, and seemed genuinely happy to have his daughter back in his life. But Alyssa began noticing things that made her uncomfortable. Stephen was spending an unusual amount of time with Katy. He would take her places alone, buy her gifts, and seemed almost obsessed with her. At first, Alyssa tried to rationalize it. Maybe he was just trying to make up for the years they'd lost. Maybe he was overcompensating for not being there during her childhood. However, the situation escalated quickly. Stephen began showing signs of possessiveness over Katy that went far beyond normal paternal concern. He didn't want her talking to other men. He became jealous when she showed interest in boys her own age. And then, something happened that would change everything forever. Stephen began sleeping in the same bed as Katy. When Alyssa confronted him about this inappropriate behavior, Stephen became defensive and angry. He claimed he was just being a loving father, but Alyssa knew better. She could see what was happening, and it terrified her. The breaking point came when Alyssa discovered that Stephen and Katy were having an intimate relationship. Her husband, the father of her children, was engaging in an incestuous relationship with their biological daughter. Alyssa was horrified, disgusted, and felt completely betrayed. She demanded that Stephen end this relationship immediately and get help. But Stephen refused. In his twisted mind, he believed what he was doing was love. He told Alyssa that she didn't understand, that his relationship with Katy was special and meant to be. The woman who had stood by Stephen through years of marriage suddenly found herself living with a stranger, a man capable of actions she never could have imagined. The situation reached a breaking point when Alyssa gave Stephen an ultimatum: choose between his wife and family, or choose Katy. Stephen made his choice, and it wasn't the one any rational person would expect from a father and husband. What happened next will haunt you. Stephen Plattel chose Katy over his wife and family. In July 2017, Alyssa filed for divorce. Unable to continue living with a man who had crossed the most fundamental boundary of human decency, she moved out, taking their other children with her, leaving Stephen alone with Katy. But Stephen wasn't content with just an inappropriate relationship. He wanted to make it official. In January 2018, Stephen and Katy were married in a ceremony that violated every law of nature and society. Katy, now 20 years old, had been completely manipulated by the man who should have been her protector. She was young, vulnerable, and had been groomed by someone she trusted implicitly. During this time, Katy became pregnant with Stephen's child. Think about that for a moment. A father impregnating his own daughter. The child will be both Stephen's son and grandson, Katy's son and brother. It was a genetic and psychological nightmare that Stephen seemed completely oblivious to. But here's what investigators would later discover about Stephen's psychological state. He wasn't just a man who had lost his way. He was controlling, manipulative, and had a history of problematic behavior that his family had overlooked for years. Neighbors reported seeing Stephen's increasingly erratic behavior, his possessiveness, and his anger issues. Meanwhile, Katy gave birth to a baby boy named Bennett in September 2017. The innocent child was the product of one of the most disturbing relationships imaginable. Stephen doted on Bennett, seeing him as proof of his love for Katy. But something else was happening. Katy was beginning to realize the magnitude of what she had gotten herself into. As months passed, Katy started to understand that her relationship with Stephen wasn't love, it was abuse. She began to see how he had manipulated her, how he had taken advantage of her vulnerability and her desire to connect with her biological family. The fairy tale reunion had become a nightmare, and Katy was trapped in a situation that seemed impossible to escape. She started reaching out to her adoptive father, Anthony Fusco, the man who had raised her with genuine love and care. Anthony had been devastated when Katy chose to live with her biological family, but he never stopped loving her. He could see that something was wrong, and he wanted to help her escape. But Stephen wasn't about to let Katy go. He had already lost his wife and other children because of his obsession with Katy. In his mind, she was all he had left, and he would do anything to keep her. When Katy started talking about leaving, Stephen's behavior became increasingly threatening and unstable. The warning signs were all there, but no one could have predicted just how far Stephen would go to prevent Katy from leaving him. Here's the moment that changed everything, and this is the twist I promised you at the beginning. In March 2018, Katy finally found the courage to do what she should have done long ago. She told Stephen she wanted a divorce. She wanted to leave him, take Bennett, and try to rebuild her life away from the toxic situation she had been trapped in. Stephen's reaction was immediate and terrifying. He flew into a rage, screaming at Katy that she couldn't leave him, that they were meant to be together, that he wouldn't let her destroy their family. Katy was frightened, but she remained firm in her decision. She had finally realized that what Stephen called love was actually imprisonment. But Katy had no idea what Stephen was planning. On April 11th, 2018, while Katy was away, Stephen made a decision that would shock investigators and horrify the public. He murdered his own 7-month-old son, Bennett, suffocating the innocent baby in his home. Stephen then hid the tiny body in a closet, like a piece of evidence he was trying to conceal. Think about that for a moment. A father killing his own child, his own grandchild, simply because he couldn't accept that his inappropriate relationship was ending. The baby, who had never asked to be born into such a twisted situation, became the first victim of Stephen's rage. The next morning, April 12th, Katy and her adoptive father Anthony Fusco were traveling together in Connecticut. Katy had finally reached out to the man who had been her real father all along, and Anthony was helping her escape from Stephen's control. They were planning to pick up some of Katy's belongings and start fresh. But Stephen had other plans. He had armed himself with an assault-type rifle and was tracking Katy's movements. He knew where she would be, and he was determined that if he couldn't have her, no one could. At around 10:30 a.m., Katy and Anthony Fusco stopped at a stop sign in New Milford, Connecticut. It was a quiet intersection, the kind of place where nothing terrible ever happens. But Stephen was waiting for them. What happened next lasted only seconds, but destroyed multiple families forever. Stephen opened fire on the car with his assault rifle, shooting both Katy and Anthony multiple times in the head and upper torso. The woman he claimed to love and the man who had actually loved and protected her were dead in seconds. But Stephen wasn't finished. After murdering the two people who represented Katy's chance at freedom, he turned the gun on himself. 3 lives ended in a matter of minutes, all because one man couldn't accept that his sick fantasy was over. The discovery of the crimes sent shockwaves through multiple communities. When police conducted a welfare check at Stephen's home in North Carolina, they found baby Bennett's body hidden in a closet. The innocent child had been dead for over 24 hours while Stephen was planning his final act of violence. The investigation revealed the full scope of Stephen's crimes. He had murdered his own son, his daughter wife, and her adoptive father in a multi-state killing spree that defied comprehension. 4 people were dead, including an innocent baby, all because one man refused to accept that his inappropriate relationship was ending. The impact on the surviving family members was devastating. Alyssa Plattle, who had tried to stop this nightmare before it began, was left to mourn the loss of her daughter and grandson while grappling with the horror of what her husband had done. She had lost her entire family in the most traumatic way possible. Anthony Fusco's family was left to mourn a man who had died, trying to help the daughter he loved. He had raised Katy with genuine care and affection, and in the end, He died protecting her from the man who should have been her protector. The case raised difficult questions about how such a situation could have developed. How does a father become so twisted that he sees his own daughter as a romantic partner? How does a young woman become so manipulated that she agrees to marry her biological father? And most importantly, how could this tragedy have been prevented? Mental health experts who studied the case noted that Stephen showed classic signs of a manipulative abuser. He had isolated Katy from her support system, convinced her that their relationship was normal and loving, and gradually escalated his control over her. When she finally tried to break free, he responded with the ultimate act of control: murder. The legal aftermath was swift but hollow. Stephen was dead, so there would be no trial, no justice in the traditional sense. The families were left to pick up the pieces of their shattered lives, while the public struggled to understand how such a horrific crime could occur. The Stephen Plattle case stands as one of the most disturbing examples of familial violence in recent memory. It shows us how manipulation and abuse can escalate to deadly levels, and how vulnerable young people can be exploited by those who should protect them. Katy Plattle was a victim from the beginning. She was manipulated by a man who used her natural desire to connect with her biological family against her. She was young, trusting, and had no way of knowing that her father was capable of such evil. When she finally found the courage to leave, it cost her everything. This case reminds us that the people who hurt us most are often those closest to us. It shows us the importance of recognizing warning signs of manipulation and abuse, and the necessity of supporting those who are trying to escape dangerous situations. As we remember Katy, Anthony, and baby Bennett, we must ask ourselves, how can we better protect vulnerable people from predators who hide behind the mask of family love? How can we create systems that recognize and respond to these warning signs before they escalate to violence? If you found this case as disturbing as I did, please share your thoughts in the comments below. What warning signs do you think were missed? How could this tragedy have been prevented? And don't forget to subscribe to True Crime Chronicles for more in-depth coverage of cases that shake us to our core. Until next time, stay vigilant and protect those you love.